God first, family, and then everything else. So our life does not consist in having many possessions. So what does the Bible have to say about the possessions that we get here in this earth? Now, I'm curious to see how many of you know this parable in the Bible, and it's found in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. This parable is a short story about two brothers fighting amongst an inheritance. And Jesus begins to tell this story about a man who had great possessions. And he said, I'm going to build bigger to store my possessions so that way I can take my ease and relax and be set for the rest of my life. But the Bible tells us that he was a fool because he did not know that his life was going to be taken that night. And then what happened to his possessions? So everything that this man thought, he was not even sure of himself. The only thing that he was sure of was that he was going to build and put all his possessions in there. But like the parable says, we don't know when we're going to die. You cannot be sure when you're going to die. You don't know when you're going to die. So the text is teaching us that we should not live our life as if our wealth, our possessions are everything to us. You know, unless we're rich in God, we're not going to get into the kingdom of heaven. 1 Timothy 6 through 10 says it like this. But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. Some of us are content in our wealth, but we're not content in our godliness because we feel that godliness is nothing because you cannot buy a Corvette with godliness. You cannot buy a house with godliness. So what he's teaching us here what Paul's teaching us here in Timothy is that we need to understand that godliness is great gain when it is accompanied with contentment. Are you happy with being godly? Are you happy with the life that God has given you? Let's read verse 7. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. In other words, all the possessions that this man had are not going to be taken with him in the afterlife. He cannot take any of it. And he works so hard to get it. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of us, we work so hard to get this materialistic stuff. And in the process of doing that, we lose friends, we lose family members because we're always working and we're always doing this and we're always doing that. And we miss out on the little things in life that we feel are nothing, but that God tells us to cherish and that God tells us to enjoy. But we can't enjoy it because we're too busy trying to store up for ourselves material possessions, and we can take our ease and our rest. So verse 8, it says, if we have food and covering with these, we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. We've seen this time and time again. It tells us that we fall into the temptation and the snare of many foolish and harmful desires, which take us deep into ruin and destruction because we're chasing after that big old buck. So the text reminds us that we need to be content with what we have, because if we're constantly chasing after the buck, then we're going to fall into temptations and we're going to fall into many harmful desires, which plunge us into destruction. Verse 10, for the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So I hope you knew that this was in our Bible. The Bible is teaching us this because it wants us to be content with what God has already given us. Not to say that you cannot get wealth. He's just simply telling us that we need to understand that godliness, being content with godliness, is better than being content with wealth. Just because you have a lot of money does not mean anything. It does not mean nothing, because if God decided to take your life today, then all of that hard work and all those relationships lost and all those blessings lost from hanging around with family members and friends, you've lost all of that to gain the dollar. You got nothing. You got nothing to show for it. So this is very important, you guys. So ultimately, the important thing here is that your life does not consist in the abundance of the things you have. Your life should be consistent in loving one another, being there for one another. If you are wealthy, using your money to help others, to do good with that money, not like this fool of this parable who decided that he's going to keep all his money and just put it in a barn and not do anything with it, as opposed to knowing that you've got goods that you can use to help somebody. And when you do that, you feel a lot better. At least use your money to help somebody else. And of course, the issue that we have here with the rich is that they fall into many temptations. They ruin themselves because the love of money, it takes everything from them. It takes it all from them, and all they focus on is the money. It's the root of all evil. Money's not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. So don't blame the money, blame the person who has the money. That's what the text is teaching us. It's trying to get us to understand, put things in order. God first, family, and then everything else. That's the important thing. Let God be God in your lives. Let him guide you. Let him lead you, and let him bless you with the blessings that will not bring anything that is going to harm us.